can remember who Betty Furness was. Does anybody? She was the voice of Westinghouse throughout the 1950s for almost all of Westinghouse appliances on TV, a former Miss America pageant winner who was the voice of Westinghouse. And if you took mobile smartphones and laid it onto that ad, almost all of the claims for mobile smartphones were being made there back in the early 50s about convenience, about one-hand use, about reception, about superior picture, about screen size. All of those things were already there. Our main feature set was already present. Welcome to the TV and Video Insider Summit. We're going to be talking about what has fundamentally changed about TV and video over the last few years, and we're in the middle of, because it's an extremely exciting era. The theme of this event is convergence and fragmentation, the ironies of TV and video right now, because two things are happening at once and going in many ways in opposite directions. Convergence, the thing that we've been talking about, or those of us who've been covering digital for 25 years have been talking about for so long. In many ways, the technical convergence is upon us. We really are seeing IPTV take over. We're seeing the digital form of delivery really dominate all aspects of video. And yet at the same time, as we've also seen throughout the history of digital, digital does not mean compatibility. Digital does not mean standards. In many ways, it often means the opposite. Digital disruption almost always is introducing radical fragmentation into the market, fragmentation of usage and fragmentation of options. There is a gold rush happening in TV and video right now. We're seeing an explosion, not only of different use cases, but also of different providers who are rushing in, trying to dominate within this field. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the ways in which those are happening at once and creating both incredible possibilities in the market, but incredible confusion. One of the frustrations I think that we're seeing is a tremendous amount of money coming in to advanced TV, to OTT, programmatic, addressable, digital video, a lot of it coming in, but as I talk to a lot of you in preparation for this event, one of the key frustrations is it's a lot of money coming in blindly, a lot of money that doesn't necessarily have the technology behind it to prove out where it's going, who's seeing it, what impact it's really having. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. The last IAB survey of brands found that more than 50% of brands say that they'll be increasing their overall video spend in the next year. And at the same time, 2/3 of them say that they're going to be moving budget from TV into digital. And yet we're seeing a lot of lamentations about how is this being measured. Where do we know where this money is going? Who's viewing it? How often? All of those things we're going to be talking about over the next few days. It creates a tremendous era in video, the sort of thing that we saw in digital 10, 15 years ago, in basic digital. We saw this explosion of innovation, the possibility for this media, for different media and different formats to go in a lot of different directions. But I think one of the frustrations that I hear as I talk to a lot of you is we have to put money here. There's no choice. The audience is there. We're watching the audience fragment radically. We're watching this, usage habits change radically. We need to put money here. We need to capture those eyeballs, even if we're not entirely sure where it's going. And one of the things we're going to be trying to do here over the next few days is capture that and capture those conversations. That's what the summit format is all about. Today, for instance, we're going to be focusing a lot on strategy. We'll be looking at what the media plan looks like when you have these many choices, how you make those choices, but also internally, how organizations, both agencies and brands, need to change internally to understand how they talk across what had been siloed areas of media buying before. Tomorrow we're going to be talking a little bit more about data, about OTT, about how data is driving different aspects of digital, and we'll be talking about some cases. And then on the third day, we're going to be talking about the merging of media and creative, that thing we've been talking about for a long time, but as we see the formats move so radically, that marriage of media and creative really needs to take place. But I want to start with you. This whole summit is really about peer-to-peer sharing of ideas. And in the past few years that we've been doing the TV and Video Summit, this summit in particular has been a particularly hot one where people really dig in and have a chance to compare notes and compare ideas. So much is going on in so many different sectors sectors of this industry, that we really need a place where people have the time and space to really talk about what they're experiencing in the market. And the kind of fragmentation of experiences, I think, is very clear in just the answers a lot of you gave me to my initial survey. I did a survey a few days ago of people coming to the summit to ask them where they were on a lot of key issues. And bear with me, it's a fairly large set of responses. I'm going to dance through them. We will put them online so you can refer to them later. But it sort of helps us set the table for the range of attitudes and perspectives that are coming into this event among all of you and the ways in which you're responding to some of these key changes. So let me start. Let's load up the first set of responses. Let me see if I got my clicker. So I started by asking, what are the top challenges in cross-screen execution and measurement? Clearly, measurement was on everybody's mind. What was interesting was the range of perspectives that we got. I know we're not going to try to read through all of these. There are a lot of different responses, but it certainly gives us a sense of, people are looking for a unified and agreed-upon approach to upfront metrics and are frustrated with the ways in which it's being measured, especially across screen. That's sort of a given. But also the ways in which different tactics are being measured differently. And of course, one thing we're going to be talking about, especially this morning, is how the planning actually goes on. Internally, how it's happening across different divisions within agencies and within brands, but also, is there a tool set that can be used that can more easily understand and rationalize all of this different spend? Audience delivery, and especially the question of who's seeing this where. What impact is it having, and is anybody seeing this, and how often are they seeing it? And something I think that Spotify raised earlier is something that seemed to be on everyone's mind. Frequency, especially in OTT, I think we all know this. Anybody who watches any of the over-the-top services knows that frequency is an issue. How many times do we really need to see in that same ad? Do they have anything else in the damn inventory? But also what effective reach is really happening? How often, and especially deduplication is another issue that came up in a lot of the discussions that I had early on going into this event. How often are we hitting the same people across these different screens? We seem to have no way of knowing this. And also, what are the values of the different screens? I think one of the things that we often avoid, we avoided it in early digital as well, is understanding that each of these screens, each of these contexts, has a different experience and a different impact. And we don't seem to be very close to understanding what those differences are yet, how we experience an ad differently in these different contexts. Budgeting and budgeting sources, again, this is something that we're going to be talking about, especially in our first panel this morning, where this money is coming from, and internally, how there's communication between digital and offline teams is something that we heard a lot about. In fact, it's one of the panels that this group asked for early on when I was starting to build the agenda. A number of people asked to simply talk about how people are internally organizing around spend. And pricing. This actually came up a lot in a number of conversations I had across the few months leading up to this, is not only that CPMs are creeping up pretty quickly on OTT, but also a number of people mentioned the problem of buying into a political hot zone. How many people experienced tremendous CPM bloat in the last quarter of last year simply because the scale of political buying that was going on? And in fact, we have several speakers and people here who are from the political realm who were part of that political buying, and you can thank for having bloated all your CPMs. I also asked some specific responses to particular platforms and how people were spending on different platforms. YouTube, in particular, really interesting range of responses when it came to YouTube. A number of people saying we simply have to be there, so we're probably more, at least for the time being, a lot of initial negative response to a lot of the negative news. But we've seen this before, of course. We've seen YouTube get dinged before in public for the ways in which user comments are sort of polluting the experience, the ways in which adjacencies are out of whack for a lot of brands and brand safety issues, and yet somehow YouTube keeps on coming back. But at least right now, it seems to be a concern. again, a lot of this around brand safety. And in particular, the money that may be moving away from YouTube in the short term, at least, is because of the fragmentation. Because there are so many other opportunities there. Everybody wants to at least try out and see how this stuff compares against the YouTube standard that they've been using for years. This was an interesting comment in particular, is the ways in which YouTube is especially capitalizing on the DTC, the emergence of direct-to-consumer brands, and especially direct response, and the ways in which it's mimicking some of the direct response TV that we've seen for a number of years. And then I asked about OTT. Universally, more money's going into OTT, but I was particularly curious about where it might be going and the thoughts about how people are responding to the OTT channel. For political clients in particular, in the last quarter, one of the things that, in talking to a lot of people on the political side going into the last election, one of the things that I kept hearing was OTT was really breaking out for them, becoming a real source, especially for some precision targeting, but also that money was moving, a lot of money, more so than we ever saw before, moving away from Facebook and into channels like YouTube and OTT. And again, one of the themes that sort of emerged in talking to people about OTT is the overall frustration and feeling we need to be there. We know the eyeballs are there. We know that the usage patterns are changing and moving there, but we're not entirely sure of what we're getting and whether we're getting what we're really paying for. And this was an interesting point that that OTT is offering a lot of attractive options outside of the duopoly. But then, of course, posing a lot of challenges to a lot of these OTT platforms for whether they can maybe address some of the weaknesses that the duopoly always had, especially around walled gardens, and whether this simply introduces a vast number of new walled gardens that we're going to have to attend to. I asked about measurement, but I in particular asked if people could talk about whether there's anything they're currently seeing in the measurement field that offers promise to them, since this has sort of been a lament forever of cross-screen measurement. It's interesting, we simply saw a remarkable range of responses to this question. From harking back to, it used to be even better when Facebook had Atlas and was offering us those sorts of metrics, to Nielsen, to Adobe's cloud offering, to better cross-communication internally, to new emerging tech from smart TVs that might do it, again, Nielsen. And this interesting point that it may actually get worse before it gets better, because especially with GDPR-like laws threatened what's already possible and good today, new walled gardens, again, this idea that with this proliferation and fragmentation, we're going to see even more walled gardens that makes this even tougher rather than easier. And the possibility of mobile devices and what we've been talking about, I've been talking about at least for 15 years, is personal people meters and whether phones can be the answer to this. Again, the incredible range of places where people are looking for solutions for this is pretty remarkable. And then finally I asked where people have been seeing the most surprising growth in video platforms. A lot of talk about the virtual MVPDs, especially like Pluto TV, Viacom's purchase of it, and what promise that offers. The Pluto TV experience is remarkable because it really points to a very different TV experience, a kind of hybrid experience between TV as we know it and digital video as we know it. I've rarely seen anything that's quite combines it in quite that way, but that seems to have caught a lot of people's attention. The ways in which OTT is being integrated into TVs, especially Roku's integration, is interesting a lot of people, and also that addressable is moving forward. And again, a range of responses to this question. Linear, not dead yet, still especially good for special demos. followed by surprised at the accelerated decline of television over the last few years. Again, these are the range of the range of opinions and ideas that we're seeing here coming into this event. And I sort of wanted to seed the discussion with that because that's what this event really is about. It's about you. It's peer-to-peer sharing. How many of you are new to our Insider Summits? Is this your first MediaPost Insider Summit? Okay. Great, welcome. We're trying to do something a little different here. It's why we have this formula of moving across the 3 days, of having this morning content followed by roundtables, by activities. We really believe in conversations that take place across multiple contexts. We think that good conversations, multiple conversations with the same people in a small group really works. And so let me give you a sense of how it works and sort of the basic summit rules. Everything we do here on stage, we're MediaPost, we're the largest provider of news and about marketing and media in the US. Everything that happens on stage is on the record and live streamed over MediaPost.com. We blog it, we report on it. It's part of the permanent record here at MediaPost. At noon, however, we flip the model, and we all come off stage, and everything goes off the record. We will break the room down into 3 large round tables. Each round table is going to extend one of the topics from the morning. And I can't stress enough, that's the heart of our summit. That's where the conversations up here, the content on here really becomes conversations among all of you, where you really get to trade ideas. The TV summit in particular over the last few years has been one of the most energetic when it comes to the round table. I can't stress enough. At noon, don't run out and take your cell phone calls and catch up on your email. Stay here for the next 45 minutes and deal with the round tables because they really are fun and informative and the heart of what we do. So welcome to all of you. Thanks again to all of our sponsors, to all of you, because the content really is coming from you. I spent the last few months talking to a lot of you, finding out what were your passions, what were your interests here, to try to make this summit of value, to try to address this morass of issues and differences of perspectives that we're seeing flood into a field that's at that historic inflection point where we're really seeing digital disruption starting to move towards some familiar formats, some new forms that will be the next generation of TV and video. So thanks all of you for being here. And we want to start with one of my favorite categories in video advertising. Long before I was doing this, I was teaching media studies, and one of my focuses and one of my passions was video gaming. I really thought video gaming was one of the great contributions that digital media was making to American culture. And as I started studying marketing, one of the things that I noticed from very early on, back in the mid-90s, is that gaming was very often at the forefront of a lot of digital marketing. If you looked at gaming back in the late 90s and early 2000s, you were seeing things happening there on social, on video, that were really, in many ways, predicting what was going to happen with the rest of the field. So I always love including them. And we're going to start with electronic arts, which, by the way, has more data on you than God. They know how many times you've failed to beat that last boss in that last level, which is, by the way, something my wife doesn't even know about me. And when they know that, they know a lot about when to talk to you, how to talk to you. But they also are paying very close attention to the ways in which you're using media. They see you across many screens. And that's where we're going to start today with Colleen Neuffer, who is the global media planning and activation lead for North America of Electronic Arts. They're the company has brought us some of the most important franchises in video gaming history. They are, but of course, it seems like video gaming should be an easy thing to market. They've got some of the best creative in the world, some of the most compelling creative in the world. It's a highly competitive marketplace. And she's going to talk to us today about the ways in which they're leveraging data across screens, but also what they're learning about how we're consuming that media and the ways in which it's informing their next generation of video strategy. Please welcome Colleen Neuffer.
Thank you, Steve, for the warm welcome, and everyone at MediaPost for putting together such a great agenda the next few days. Let's see if my thing works. All right. So it's an honor to be here today in a room full of fellow media professionals. I know we are all facing the same challenges when we're crafting our brand's video mix, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. It's no secret that the video landscape has become highly fragmented. Consumers have more choices and devices and ways to stream content than ever before. Oh, speaking of which, from watches to smartphones and connected TVs, the average American is projected to have over 13 devices connected to the internet in their phone. 13 devices, that's a lot. That means our job as video marketers has becoming increasingly difficult. The ability to identify these moments, to have breakthrough moments with our consumers in a meaningful way at scale is a challenge. And at EA, our mission is to inspire the world to play. And when I say world, I truly mean it. We heard about Steve's passion for video gaming. The amount of people that self-identify as a gamer in the past few years has significantly increased. Everyone from your grandmother playing a casual mobile game, to your next door neighbor playing competitive Madden or competitive FIFA, to what seems to be every high schooler in the world right now obsessed with the latest Battle Royale craze. There's literally a game for everyone. And for the purposes of today's presentation, I'll be talking about our latest game, Anthem, which just came out last Friday. So let me be the first shameless marketer to stand up here and go tell you to buy my product if you haven't already. Anthem is a multiplayer game that was developed by BioWare. It's about teaming up with your friends as armored superheroes and tackling the futuristic world. It's a lot of fun. I've spent a lot of hours already playing this past weekend. And because it's so inspiring and everyone wants to know what's the backstory behind these games, we partnered with Neil Blomkamp, who's an award-winning director who you guys may know from his action-packed films like District 9 or Asylum. He got a preview of Anthem gameplay a few years ago. He was so inspired by it that he asked if he could create a short film to help us tell us the story behind Anthem. I'm going to focus on that today because I think it's a perfect example of how we're being creative in the way that we're bringing our stories to the world. So here's a cut down of that film.
Long, long ago, we were the slaves of the Urgoth. And eventually, after much strife, we broke free. But there are many dangers. No one can survive out there on their own.
We found her last night. In the jungle.
They said she must have been out there for years.
I always knew this day would come. A line would be crossed. New enemies would be forged. Things would never return to the way before.
Where is she?
The anthem knows you. It knows us all.
Rated T for teen.
So hopefully that was the adrenaline boost everyone needed on a Monday morning, especially after a cocktail hour last night. So with this spot, this trailer, we produced such an emotional response from our players in the gaming community at large. In the first week alone, we dropped it a week before the game came out, we got over 3 million views on YouTube alone. And because consumers go through this emotional and rational decision-making when deciding if they want to buy a game like this, we need to take that same mindset in the way that we approach media. And at EA, we are creative in our core. We have been since our very beginning. We're a company of storytellers, creators, game developers, so really living the art behind crafting our media plan, because that same mentality definitely trickles down to our marketing department. And from a science perspective, we understand the value, as Steve said, of data and the new science of data-driven media and connecting with our audience. But we also know at the same time, we can never lose sight of the art that goes with planning. And speaking of data, our favorite topic, EA is often talked a lot about because of the robust data that we have. For us, this is a tool to help us understand who our players are. What are their motivators? What are their behaviors in game? Our CMO, Chris Bruzos, a few years ago, actually 5 years ago now, made the decision to combine our analytics and marketing team. And because of that, the same analysts who are feeding data to our game developers on ways to improve gameplay based on real-time data that we're getting, those same analysts are sharing insights with us on how we can best understand who these people are and how to craft our video strategies. So in terms of the data that we're talking about, it's player motivations. We've done a lot of studies around the why behind people play. Is it for the competitive aspect? Is it because they want to belong and be a part of a team or be immersed in a rich storyline? There's several different reasons, and we make sure to first understand when promoting a game, who is this game made for? What is that attitudinal study showing us? And then from our data in-game, we understand a lot of things about what people are doing in the game. So what games are they playing across our portfolio? Has it been 2 years since they bought a copy of FIFA? If so, that's a reason for us to be marketing to that individual. What platforms are they playing on? How do they feel when they lose or when they win? Those are moments in time for us as marketers to take a step back and really understand who our players are. So to help bring this to life, in the instance of Anthem, I've made it a pretend persona here. We'll call him Dave for the purposes of today's presentation. He's a passionate team player. This is what we know from our attitudinal studies. He really enjoys the team aspect of video games. He's a fan of BioWare, the studio who produced Anthem. We know he'll be a likely fit for this game. And we can tell from our portfolio that he also plays NBA Live. He's a big fan of team sports in general, especially playing on console. And with that, we also know he enjoys comic books. So from a media perspective, this creates a content alignment opportunity for us. And his favorite team is the Warriors, which so happens to be mine too. Go Dubs! And really starting our media planning with understanding who our players are first is our driver for the way that we go about crafting plans and finding those ways that we can be meaningful in our breakthroughs with consumers. So in talking about the art and planning, when we start with the consumer, we can be very selectful in when and why we show up. And when you have an asset like the Blomkamp trailer, which I just showed you, you want to be just as creative in the way that you bring that to market. Because of the way EA is situated in-house, we have our team of programmatic, search, and social experts who are going through cross-channel training right now so they can partner hand in hand with our agency when we're crafting our cross-channel video approach. And that's something that's worked really well for us. It's allowed our plans to be truly integrated across plans and rooted in our understanding of who our players are. So for Anthem and this Blomkamp spot, obviously it's a theatrical spot, so what better place to show it than in the movie theaters when you have that big power of sight, sound, and motion on the big screen. We also knew from Dave that he was a fan of comic books, so aligning with the movies when Captain Marvel is coming out made perfect sense. And another big pillar of the focus on art is finding moments in time where we can reach a more receptive audience. When are they most likely to be engaged and leaned in? With Dave, he's a Warriors fan. So we had a big NBA strategy aligning with live games when people are less likely to fast forward. And ended up debuting the spot in the All-Star game, which had a ton of positive reception. And all of these decisions were intrinsic things that we knew were the right thing to do with this asset, but we had the data points to help back that up. Everyone has seen this slide a million times. Why is it important to start with the consumer? Because of this, because of the fragmentation that we're facing. Consumers have more choices. We have more choices in buying that same inventory. There's 5 different ways that you can buy traditional linear TV now, and with the rise of OTT, it's really hard to get to the same scale of reach that we used to be able to get to 10 years ago by running one spot in American Idol. So our challenge as video marketers has become increasingly difficult on building that scale across the different screens, across the different content providers. And so for someone like Dave, we can make the assumption that he's likely not subscribing to traditional TV anymore, with 1 in 3 households under the age of 35 no longer subscribing to TV. People aren't graduating college, getting an apartment, and signing up for cable TV anymore. We also know that for the first time last year, mobile surpassed TV in terms of time spent. And a large portion of CTV users are no longer subscribing to cable. So one may think, by looking at this, that we would be backing away from TV entirely. That's not what we're doing. We understand that we need to have a truly diversified video approach in order to show up in meaningful ways. What we are doing is taking a second look at our TV investment to make sure it's as most impactful as it can be by applying learnings from our data-driven channels into what we're doing for TV. And at the end of the day, the more options that we have as advertisers and as consumers is making human attention a scarce commodity. We're having a hard time finding ways to reach consumers with our advertising, and at the same time having a hard time finding ways and time for them to actually play our games. Recently, the Netflix CEO made a comment that he thought Fortnite was his biggest competition, even over HBO. That means that the lines between gaming and entertainment are certainly becoming blurred, and there is just this fight for attention and getting people's time. So for us, what this means is taking a step back, remembering that people are not out looking for our ads. Just because we have a new sale or a new game out on market doesn't mean people are scanning their pre-rolls trying to find our ad. So always taking a step back, remembering who the consumer is, and finding ways that we can be meaningful in the way that we break through. And so as the landscape shifts and talking about the different ways that we can buy TV, we first take a look at the scale and targeting options that the different TV options buy us. And we are definitely shifting more into data-driven channels, whether that be addressable or programmatic. But at the same time, we're looking at the learnings that we're getting from true audience-delivered buys to help inform what we're doing for traditional TV. So for instance, if we see on a programmatic buy or an addressable TV buy that's naturally delivered content based on where the viewer is showing higher engagement with certain types of content, that then informs what we're doing from a traditional TV standpoint in real time. We're able to make those programming selections. So bringing it back together with the connection of art and science, while we are shifting more and more into data-driven channels, we're also maximizing the impact of linear, like I said. So for art, this means identifying those meaningful moments, finding times when consumers are truly leaned in and engaged and receptive to what we have to say, and also having a creative, like what I just showed you, helps break through in those ways. And then from a science perspective, obviously we are data first, but we want to make sure we're using our data learnings to apply to channels that maybe aren't as data-driven. So if you remember 3 things from what I said today, these are kind of the 3 big takeaways. From a data standpoint, it's there to help validate our decisions. We've all been in this industry for quite some time and intrinsically know the right thing to do when certain instances come up. We knew that Dave was a fan of the NBA, so running an all-star game was a natural fit for us, but having that data point to help back that up felt great. We also want to make sure that we're optimizing our mix in real time. So taking the learnings that we're getting from our digital and data-driven channels to improve what we're doing from a traditional standpoint. And lastly, and probably most importantly, is continually test, and test some more. The more you test new platforms, new partners, new networks, new content areas, and asset types, the smarter your video mix will come over time. We typically carve out around 10 to 20% of our video budget to do exactly that. So thank you guys for having me here today. At EA, we found tremendous success in looking at both the data of science and also the art that goes with planning. Thank you.
Colleen, hang on, Colleen, we have questions. We have time for questions of Colleen. If anyone throughout the summit, for those of you who have questions, please stand, tell us who you are and who you're with.
We're here. I got it, Steve.
Go ahead.
Tell us who you are, where you work. Hi, Kevin Hayes from American Target Network. Hi. So in your example where you talked about how you utilize the All-Star Game to target that user that you talked about, how do you measure then the result of buying into the All-Star Game? Is it just awareness? Is it people going to the website? Is it downloads? Is it increase?
For us, it was an awareness play.
Okay.
We've had this vicious cycle of always looking at the lowest hanging fruit. So for instance, looking at someone who bought FIFA 18 to market to FIFA 19. that very DR-focused media isn't putting us in the right places to reach more of that mass audience. When I talk about marketing to the world and reaching people that are harder to find than normal, it's about finding tentpoles like the All-Star Game to drive mass awareness and build reach for our brand.
To gain newer potential users, right?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
You mentioned lean-in moments, and
Yeah.
I'm really interested about how you're defining context. So there's the context of the sort of content affinities, but then there's also the context of what you're learning about what those lean-in moments. And as you're moving across these different media and different media experiences, are there any things that you're finding about the differences in sort of lean-in moments and whether some of these different channels are better and worse? Is linear still the king of lean-in, or are there others that you're seeing that actually are optimizing better when it comes to that kind of experience that you're looking for, that receptivity?
Yeah, I think things like linear in cinema, when someone is sitting down in full attention to the screen and talking about moments like live sports or live award shows, that's still such a unique moment for us as brand marketers. I would definitely say that's where our priority is, but there's also a rise of a lot of new formats on OTT that are offering a similar type experience, but building those at scale is where we run into issues.
And how are you measuring that? How are you determining whether you're really having that impact and what different impact you're having across those screens?
It's really just taking a look at the placement and again, going back to what we intrinsically know as planners to understand if that's something that we feel like would break through in that moment. We also do a lot of ongoing brand studies and can see where we're seeing the highest brand engagement.
Hi. So you're obviously sitting on a treasure trove of data. On the flip side, the consoles are obviously a very contextual place for you to run video. How easy, or maybe not so easy, is it to port a lot of your data to the consoles and maybe all of the, let's call it the platforms within the consoles to deliver your video?
So while we are a very data-heavy company, one thing we're not good at is sharing it outside of our walls. So I'm sure you guys have heard that from a lot of brands. But we take extra caution, and the reason we have such a big in-house team is to keep that data as close to the vest as possible. So while we do prioritize video on console, we're not using our first-party data to do that.
I saw a question over here. No? Oh, right here. Just please tell us who you are, where you work.
I'm Sonia Savati at Click Health. I just wanted to unpack a little bit that statement that you had for this earlier one for like advertising on the All-Star Game versus like the data-driven, like the awareness versus the data-driven. Like I struggle a lot with that conversation of like, oh, just pour it all into like this digitally data-driven versus the awareness. How does that conversation go at EA that's such a data-driven company?
Yeah, what we try to do is use our data to maximize reach on the truly addressable channels like programmatic and addressable TV first. We then use TV and things like cinema to build incremental reach on top of that.
Hi, Brad from Spotify. This is a completely self-serving question, and I understand contextually we're at the TV and Video Summit, but I wanted to ask a question about music. It seems like music is such an important part of the overall gaming experience, and just curious to know how you lean into that as a potential marketing vehicle.
Yeah. So for us, music is a huge pillar. There's music with all of our games. They come with a soundtrack, and there's a lot of work that goes into the soundtracks that come with each of our games. So we work with audio partners to bring that to life. Where we've had an issue is we are such a visual company, so we rely heavily on video. The bulk of our mix is video. How do we convey a message like the Anthem trailer over audio is where we've had difficulty in running in places like digital audio. So we've prioritized video and display in those platforms.
Could you tell us a little bit about what that Anthem media plan looked like? Beyond, I mean, you told us that the in-theater one was particularly bad, but you tell us what, and just sort of how it sort of broke out and where you were hit. Who you were targeting and what media and channels you were hitting with it?
The interesting part is when we first put the plan together, we didn't know we would have such a powerful asset to leverage. So we first built the plan understanding who the consumer was, building out those layers of the plan from national TV to cinema to out of home. How can we drive awareness of this? It's EA's first new IP in over a decade. So we really wanted to make a splash, and we couldn't look at what we've done in the past because it was brand new. It had no brand identity yet. So really looked at high reach channels to bring it to market. And then when we found out about the Anthem, the Blomkamp trailer, we kind of revisited all of our placements to make sure we were finding really smart areas to run that both contextually and with an engaged audience.
So once you got a different creative, it actually flipped the strategy and you started thinking about engagement rather than reach?
It was still reach, but we wanted to make sure we were maximizing engagement in those high impact moments.
What were some of the places that you were putting it where you think you really were maximizing engagement?
Cinema. So we knew that Captain Marvel was going to be coming out right in our window, and that the people that were likely going to be playing Anthem were huge comic book fans, so that was a natural place to run it. Also running in just movies on TV and digital video, finding those kind of longer format streaming content areas to run a spot like this. The full-length spot was 4 minutes, and our creative team first came to us and go, okay, build a master plan with a 4-minute asset, which I think we all know can be challenging. Not all formats obviously support that. We compromised and landed on a 90-second asset, which we've been able to use in the All-Star game and a few different digital areas.
Colleen will be, oh, here we go.
Hey, I'm Jesse from Forward PMX. Probably a question for a different team in your company, but with the competition for attention that you talked about, the Fortnite versus Netflix, I wonder if, have you guys seen an influx of brands wanting to integrate with your products, co-branded experiences in non-traditional kind of paid spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. I think video game is having its moment right now. Fortnite helped with that. We just came out with a similar battle royale game called Apex Legends, which is gaining a lot of that traction. And there is a lot of attention from other brands on how we can integrate with that. I know Disney and Marvel also have their own interest in Disney Interactive, but those are big conversations that we had from a brand perspective.
I know from we've had EA here, a number of you from EA over recent years, and I know that one of the pushes at EA was using its data more effectively to sell across its portfolio rather than focusing on a campaign-centric approach, title by title. In this case, obviously, you had new IP, so you needed that campaign approach. I'm curious on what was the other piece of this than when it came to marketing to your own customers, this new IP?
Yeah, so with this one, we wanted to go broader than our existing customer base. We felt like if we went broad and got enough buzz, the rest would follow. And when we think about our portfolio, we always do take a step back before the fiscal year starts and look at our video investment as a whole to understand what the bets we want to take are across the portfolio. Because we still do plan beat by beat, campaign by campaign, but it's important to always take that step back and analyze what the big bets you want to take are in the coming year.
Colleen Newford, thank you very much. Colleen's going to be with us for a few days, so we can talk to her then. Let me invite Joe and our first panel up. The most requested panel that we had, as I surveyed people when I was building this agenda, was to talk about not only what people are planning, but who's doing the planning within organizations, how communication is happening internally across media planning teams to get the work done, especially that it's no longer a clean divide between traditional linear TV and digital. We have OTT sitting in the middle, sitting in both camps. So today, and this was the panel everybody wanted to be on, by the way. To take the lead on this, we have somebody who knows, who just on his way to the stage forgot more about the agency world than I'll ever know. Joe Mandisi is our longtime editor-in-chief at MediaPost, has been studying the agency world for over 30 years. Please welcome Joe Mandisi.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. Over the years, I've also studied a little bit about television. It was the first medium I covered when I worked for Adweek back in the early 80s. And in some ways, I feel like a lot of things we're talking about today, we were talking about back then. I just want to open with one personal anecdote, which is I'm always shocked at how badly technologies we write about don't actually sometimes work from a consumer perspective. So in my household, the Oscars are like the Super Bowl. And somehow I planned the flight in here last night, forgetting that it was Oscar night, so my wife's a little angry at me. But I figured, oh, no problem, I'll just live stream it, right? I mean, there's 8 million ways from Sunday that you could do this, and I failed. I mean, it was just a terrible experience because I pre-downloaded the ABC To Go app, did everything I thought I could to prepare. I got on the flight, and what happens is they try and geolocate you, so they can assign it to your local carrier, and that won't work when you're 40,000 feet up. I tried Pluto TV, but the sticker shock of putting your credit card in for like $50 just to sign up was too much. I downloaded YouTube TV because it was seamless into my Gmail and Google account. I have 5 days to cancel it, but none of it worked. Well, data lives forever. The first thing I noticed when I opened the YouTube TV app, if any of you have done it, is there's a little tab in there for Nielsen ratings. I mean, it's just embedded in. Anyway, that's my personal anecdote of a fail. So I'm excited to do this panel. Why don't we just have each of you just open up by introducing yourself and describing your organization, and specifically, like to the extent you can, how are you organized right now to plan across screens, linear to OTT to connected to YouTube?
Matt Siri, Havas Media, which is actually a combination of the old MPG and Media Contact, so you had a traditional and a more digital agency that we're built from. How we plan, it actually depends on client group to client group, but mostly we have our our video investments group that is guided by the generic, let's call it the planning team for lack of a better term, in terms of the optimizations, and then the video investment team goes to market from everything from linear to programmatic to addressable.
Adrienne Holthouse, I'm from Ex-Veris Media. We're a small, scrappy agency out of LA, and it was actually bred by folks that were with larger agencies and didn't really like the model and thought it might be a lot of fun to come together and work with some challenger brands. So when it comes to planning video across screens, we are an organization that is dedicated to bringing on integrated planners from top to bottom. So if you don't have experience across a variety of mediums, it doesn't necessarily make sense for us as an agency and the clients that we're buying for. We also bring on subject matter experts in different areas. So for example, we'll have a YouTube and search expert, social media subject matter experts and things like that to help support the overarching strategy for a client when we're planning across mediums.
Hi, I'm Ryan Mearstein with Targeted Victory, and I'm one of those guys that was driving up CPMs last fall in the political space. Just a little context, I'm going to try to speak with perspective from the political space and kind of what we saw in 2018 and how that drives how we're set up at Targeted Victory. And, 9 out of 10 times kind of what we're seeing in the political space is a bifurcation where you've got, when it comes to video, linear TV, and then everything else. And so we kind of sit in that everything else category at Targeted Victory. And, in that space, we try to be screen agnostic and develop ways to scale as much as possible against first-party data, which our political campaigns are dumping an incredible amount of resources into.
Okay, so it sounds like some different variations here. It sounds like Havas has a pretty traditional hierarchical approach to television/video. And then you're more of a comms planning or strategic approach. And then you have a very specific tactical use, finding the data and assigning it to the viewer. And so 3 different mixes. So I'd like to get into next is really thinking about whether the industry even thinks about structuring television and video the way consumers actually experience it today. There was just a Havas study that came out this week we reported on the number of brands in the world and the fact that only like 23% of them are even relevant to the average consumer. And I'm citing that because there's no better category to show the fragmentation, proliferation of choice than video. About 20 years ago, the first generation of programmatic started when agencies adopted these audience reach optimizers. And the reason they did that back in the mid-90s is because there was just too many options for a media planner or buyer to plan anymore. They had to rely on a programmatic or algorithmic approach to assigning reach. And everything's been a progression from there. So my question is, if you had to rethink this and reinvent it, would you plan and buy media the way we do, television in particular, the way we do today?
Well, we like to take an audience-based approach to our media buying. So For us, a lot of it starts with taking a look at who it is we're trying to reach. So we're using tools like MRI, for example, and it has a lot of really great traditional TV data, but it's now starting to add some of these other services. So now we can not only take a look at what the consumption is, where the higher indexes are, but there's also those psychographic statements then that you can layer on top and really figure out some of the more intelligent and unique channels that maybe you wouldn't have done before. So once again, we're taking that integrated approach. And it was interesting listening to the EA presentation and a lot of those cultural moments as well. So we truly do believe there is a place for linear, but taking advantage when it makes sense for clients and campaigns and brands, those really interesting tentpole or cultural moments to release that content.
I would say yes. I would still approach it in a similar way from the 90s. I'm a Erwin Efron acolyte, that's not how you say it. Rest in peace, buddy. The tenets of recency theory and continuity are still in play. How you get that maximized reach is a vastly different approach than where we were before. At Havas, what we do, the reason why we have a lot of our traditional planners do a lot of the optimizations is that they have the oversight over linear and how programmatic can help you expand that reach and how online video can play in that space, and then factoring in all the CPMs and viewability and things like that. Ultimately, those do go into a holistic optimizer so you can maximize your reach. I work on a lot of CPG brands, so reach is king there. I was one of the quotes up earlier in the presentations where those tools need to get better. You can plug in a YouTube in there and just intuitively the reach contribution doesn't necessarily make sense within the broader landscape, but we're getting there and we're getting better. I would say that the core tenets of how we started doing it in the 90s still hold true with, let's say, some tweaks depending on the tactic.
Okay, so I think we have two very different types of planner buyers here. So you come at it from a very traditional hierarchical approach, and you're coming at it from it's the data stupid, find the where the consumers are and buy the media that's right for them. I want to come back and challenge you a little bit, Ryan, because I'm sorry, Matt, because the concept of it feels like there's a little bit of legacy in this still. Yes, I was there when Erwin Efron coined recency, and the reason he explained that we needed optimizers back then was there was just too many options. He actually had a number, it was like 4.7 quadrillion options that you could plan and buy with media. But the problem really starts with the fact that you're starting with television, that you have to put the base buy down. The whole way the system in the industry works, from the upfront, where you're actually forced to move in a market before budgets are even set for the year, things like that. I don't want to go rhyme and verse on that, but I think more than anybody on this panel, I'd like to hear from you whether you think this should be reinvented, or it's just that you're Havas and WPP and Group M and Interpublic all are moving battleships, and you still need to get the base buys down and then fill in strategically, tactically to target audiences from there.
So I'm not totally, I don't know if we're aligned there. When we're doing video optimizations, linear or traditional is a part of that. One of my clients is a vitamins company. They tend to be a little bit older focused in their targeting, so linear is going to be a bigger mix of that. If I had cool brands like video games to work on, I'm sure over-the-top, addressable programmatic would be a much larger piece of that. I would say we go in platform agnostic, and that's a core tenet of Havas, in our video planning to see where the audiences are, and then we optimize to maximize reach according to that audience. Now, it's interesting with our optimizers today, a lot of them, it's hard to get beyond some of the core demographics. I would love to have an optimizer that said, okay, 18 to 34-year-olds that play soccer video games, and then we can optimize against that target. Not quite sure we're there yet.
Okay, well, I'm going to still try and reinvent the wheel if we can a little bit here. But let's look at it a little differently, which is if it's really a consumer-centric approach to media, shouldn't you really be targeting and identifying the audience you want to reach, agnostic of how you would reach them in the marketplace, and then figure out the best way to reach them in the marketplace. And I guess the weight here is that it has to be an audio-video message. That's the common hook across all these connected screens and OTT and TV. Because I was struck by the guy from Spotify getting his message in here. But to me, it's about reaching the audience and then figuring out what the right format is. So do we have this kind of backwards a little bit in the sense that shouldn't we be looking at? I'd like to hear maybe a little bit more from you because you have a very strategic but also tactical approach to building up an audience.
Yeah, and like I said in the opening, we have these silos between linear television and kind of everything else. But I guess the good news on that front is we do have the same data that is informing each of those silos. And we do have good coordination across creative within each of those silos. But I think it's important in the political space to understand the business model and the success proposition that we have to live under. And I think those two things allow legacy strategies to stay around a lot longer than they probably should. Because, I don't know that I believe it's still a good idea to be buying 1,000 to 1,500 points a week on linear television, but we're doing it. And it's because we have the money then, and we have little time then, and that's when people are paying attention. But we also have a business model or a success proposition where if we get 49% of the market, we are losers. Where like other people in here might get 49% of the market and be billionaires. And so it is very tough to, when we're in a cycle of only every 2 years, it is very tough to say that we are going to change the model because other folks are seeing this and test this through the fall of 2020 when we know something else has worked in the past. And so it creates a pretty difficult situation and allows legacy items to stay around longer than they should.
Yeah, I'm shocked in a category as vertical as political that so much of the weight still goes into TV as the base. But isn't a lot of that the campaigns and the candidates, that there's a legacy there? They expect that, and
the donors as well.
Yeah.
All of our funding, comes from donors, and a lot of them want to see a really fancy television commercial on TV, and so I do think we are making great strides and getting much better in our media mix. And I was talking to Ben about that earlier, and I think he'll probably reiterate that as well. We are definitely moving in the right direction. I think like 4 years ago, you would have heard a lot of complaining on the political side about like digital being left behind. I think we are definitely moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I'd say culture is the number one thing I've observed in this industry of things changing or not changing. And, in this case, I think there's a huge bias towards conventional linear TV thinking. But I was struck when Colleen did her little Lumascape chart, all those different options on there. And one of the ones I didn't see was actually live video game playing, which to me is a whole nother video medium, things like Twitch, and it's huge. And if you want to target young millennials, in particular males, I think, that's where you need to be to get them. So I guess on that frame, do we have the right cultural mindset to understand how to use video properly when it's all of these discrete audiences experiencing things, and obviously not in flight watching the Oscars, but, all these different ways? I mean, AMC did a presentation about 10 years ago at a TV Critics Tour and figured out there was more original hours of TV programming being produced than human beings could watch. And so all those things that you were recording on your hard drive, on your DVR, wherever, you may never ever get to because there's more content coming. That was 10 years ago. So if you put things like Twitch into the mix, I don't think you could even get an norepinephrine optimizer to come up with an effective reach plan now. I don't know.
If anyone could invent that, they'd be a rich person, right?
It's true. You do, clients have these requirements around their reach and frequency, but it is a challenge because it is so fragmented. So does that RNF make sense on the same RNF that you're running for linear? Does it make sense when you're running on YouTube and when you're running on Hulu and so on and so forth? It's really tricky to make some sort of a unified model.
Where do they come from? I mean, in the old days, there would be these Nielsen cumes done every decade or so, and people would benchmark an effective frequency of 3 or whatever, and that's how it all got done. Where are they coming from today?
When we do a lot of our video optimizations, it is difficult. Sometimes you can pull from a marketing mix model. Those are typically based on GRPs. A lot of times we'll try to see the inflection point where reach maxes out and you're building more frequency. So there aren't any real solid hard and fast rules. To go back a minute or two ago, though, I think, when we first started with reach optimizers, we had this one pure fuel of Nielsen data, right? So you could essentially optimize across your universe. The problem now is that there's so many data streams out there with your target. Nielsen TAR is able to somewhat bring that together, but the more we're able to pipe that in a unified set, the better we'll be able to start optimizing against these channels. The problem is it's not like we're going from just linear TV to linear TV and YouTube, right? It's linear TV, YouTube, and a bazillion other video outlets out there, and then you layer on the data. The fragmentation of it is really what's holding back our optimizers.
Well, that was kind of what I was trying to get at before, which is that there's still this front-end logic of planning a base buy and reach and frequency, and then all the optimization's done on the back end through attribution or multi-screen or multi-touch attribution or regression models to see what worked and what didn't. Why do we still plan the same way we did 20, 30, 40 years ago?
I don't want to take up all the hot air up here. We optimize in a similar fashion because that's, it's based on the limitations of some of our optimizers. A lot of the things like Nielsen TAR, we're actually looking on the back end to see how well we did, and then using that to feed into the future optimizations.
Same. We use concentric modeling to take a look at things and see how they performed, but it is a little bit backward looking to a degree because you are looking at something not while it's active and in flight, you're looking at something after the fact to determine effectiveness to then inform how you're going to plan in the future. To date, I haven't seen any really strong tools that allow me to do in-flight optimization to the degree where I would want it to, because every channel has a different approach to measurement and the types of attribution that you can apply. So there is no simple approach to it, and I think because there isn't, people can kind of get a little bit stalled by it.
I think it's just also a perception thing. We believe there's supposed to be a TV planner, a digital planner, a mobile planner, whatever it is, and that's how we believe the world works, and so that's how we plan.
No, you need organizing principles for sure. Otherwise, it would be crazy, right? Yeah, I would love to geek out on that kind of data and weighting scheme, but I think we're going to have a panel tomorrow that goes into that, and I think the room can probably only take so much of that dive. But so none of you really answered my question of whether we should reinvent this in some way and what it should be.
How about once we can make a big jump in data streams, then we'll reinvent the optimizers.
Or if we can make some sort of a unified approach to how the planning and buying is done. Is it GRPs? Is it TRPs? Is it impressions? Is it this? Is it that? It's all over the map. And because there's nothing that's unified, it is a little antiquated. But I will say that I think no matter what, consumers are going to chase good content, regardless of the device that it's on, and whether it's a one-to-many platform or a one-to-one platform. It's really the content that's wagging the tail.
Well, you still have the core kernel or the denominator of the GRP and the CPM, but around that you can always create any kind of guarantee or end-to-end delivery. There have been performance-based buys. I'm sure Havas and all of you have done some of them. We just wrote a story recently about Horizon Media who did a cost per channel turn for a TV client. So you can put anything into the contract and the guarantee and the delivery if you can measure it. The rest is confidence, right? It's having the confidence to do it. But it still seems to me like we're coming at it from this GRP mentality, and I'm having a hard time. I'm struggling with it because, I grew up covering television and media, and when I started covering digital, I didn't understand why there was no universe estimate for digital. They buy uniques. And I would ask them, so what's the share of uniques? And they look at me like I have two heads on. my shoulders. But so we're trying to retrofit these two worlds where you're getting a literal share of a supply, a finite supply of something, to something that's like infinite. And I don't really understand how you reconcile those two things. Seems like you either do it in the front end to get your base logic or linear TV or your campaign buy, and then you're doing this stuff on the back end to optimize against the delivery or performance or voter or whatever. That seems like a very confused marketplace to me. Well, maybe we'll turn over to some questions and I'll come back and try and get an answer to that.
Christine at Kramer Krasselt. I think I kind of agree with what's happening is we do not have a defined universe size. If we could find one that stemmed between both linear and video, then maybe we'd have a better way to find planning tools and a better way to plan across all of the devices. I think once that can be developed, and if it's ever developed, like Matt said, maybe then we can finally work all together and have one planning team doing all of it. Until that happens, might be still, we have to work kind of siloed and then find back-end ways to make it all work.
Does Kramer Krasselt still handle Master Lock? No. No? Okay. For years, you guys would. For years. Yeah, okay.
I think we did more of the creative.
Yeah, and the amazing Super Bowl commercials. Well, it's a great question. You know, a while back, we tried to create some kind of universe estimate for digital at MediaPost, working with a company called JumpShot. I think it's still live, but basically what we did is we created a panel of digital users and we tracked their usage levels each day. So it was like a hut or a putt for digital, but nobody ever did anything with it, so I think we stopped promoting it. So I don't know what a better way would be to build you know, a universe estimate, but I would think it would have to be user up in some way. When you go into the market for a political campaign, you're thinking of the universe of registered voters, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, to target your dollars. That's your universe, right? Mm-hmm. Then you have to retrofit in and say how much of this Nielsen universe can you obtain that way, and then you go into the nonlinear portions of it to figure out how you can fill in for that. Is that kind of the way it works?
Yeah, so I mean, we're working with, you know, on the political side, we're spending millions and millions of dollars on curating these voter files and bringing massive amounts of commercial data in with the voter files that we are collecting from individual Secretary of States, counties, however it works at the state-by-state basis. It's incredibly arduous process, and you know, entire firms are built around just managing these voter files. And so that is our base currency for our audiences. And so the linear guys are working to optimize their buys based on that voter file audience that we have deemed our persuasion audience, our turnout audience, whatever it may be. And then on digital, we are working with Google, Facebook, the LiveRamps of the world to bring as much of that into the space as possible and deliver as much of that against that first-party data as we can, and then figure out how do we scale beyond that when that scale ends. So
I guess the big question in all of this is how do you kind of avoid duplication if you're targeting this audience? You have a good census or universe estimate of who the target is. How do you know when you're getting incremental reach or duplication?
So we do not try to avoid duplication. We try to moderate against it. There is no avoiding it, and especially because we are trying to cram so much money into the media spend in such a small amount of time. So we try to, as best as possible, write a plan that hedges against that across, you know, if I'm looking at 3 different silos, Google, Facebook, programmatic, and then plan accordingly through that. But there is no avoiding it.
Okay. All right. So it still feels to me like we're we have two different worlds here, really kind of approaching this, one coming at it from more of a TV-centric baseline and another coming at it from a kind of a consumer orientation and then filling in how much of the weight should go into TV and other options. Do you think overall we're moving as an industry away from, you know, historic view of TV values into more of a performance or conversion or maybe a commerce model? And is that a good thing?
Yes, I think we are, and yes, I do think it's a good thing. I think if, you know, the first ones that come out with that ability to have really strong, shoppable advertising experiences where it warrants it, I think are going to definitely lead the charge in those areas. When you've kind of, to me, that's one of the largest proofs of that return on ad spend, is if someone's watching my commercial that I've planned for my CPG client on an OTT device, and then they're from there actually making a purchase directly in that moment. I mean, that's the win-win ultimately.
Right. Do any of you have direct-to-consumer brands that are doing that right now?
We have one brand that we plan for that's actually, I can't let the cat out of the bag, but that's actually releasing that technology on their platform very soon, and when that happens, it's going to be amazing.
I would say, and again, I don't want to mischaracterize, we don't plan TV first and everything else. It's a video agnostic approach to it. Until we can get our attribution correct, and even, you know, the best marketing mix modeling isn't perfect, it's difficult to assign, you know, anything beyond a delivery cost mechanism to investments, right? Because you can say it's based on a cost per conversion in your video plan, but there could be 7 other different reasons why you had that conversion. So let's hopefully get the measurement right of the audiences. We won't even talk about frequency, because even within platforms, that's a very difficult thing to monitor. And some brands, if I see, you know, X commercial on, you know, the same sports over-the-top view, I might, you know, go crazy. Once we get those more basic pieces down, then I feel like we have license to go drive a cost per conversion model off of your video plan.
So would that be a good thing from Havas's point of view?
I think any agency's point of view, because then, you know, it solves a lot of the remuneration issues and things like that.
Okay, so as soon as we can, we will move to a performance-based TV planning approach.
For me, that would be great.
Okay, and we don't care about upper funnel as much?
I wouldn't say that. You know, you still, it depends on the metric that your client is looking after, right? If you are a very DTC, you started with DTC, so if you're a Razor Club or something like that, sure, it's, you know, cost per unit sold. For brands that are a bit more awareness driving, you know, that's their KPI, so that's the way they should be structuring, or maybe would want to structure their video plan.
Yeah, we're in a funny time because we have a lot of these direct-to-consumer brands present at these conferences, and within their own little walled garden, they do a pretty good job of optimizing. They may not be using as much channels, although they tend to move into TV, traditional TV, as soon as they can get to the scale. But then you have companies like Kraft Heinz, you know, one of the great television brands of all time, who are now beleaguered and maybe, you know, being challenged because that model doesn't work as well as it used to. So do you see any hope for brands like that who were reliant on mass dispersion, reach building, advertising to build awareness and differentiation, competing in this world of hyper back-end performance?
I think there's opportunity there. I think one of the challenges that comes around is the lack of wanting to share data back with those that could really use it.
I heard that from EA. She didn't want to share her data.
So if the information sharing is a little bit more fluid, then I think there could be a lot of really great opportunity there. Having worked on performance brands in the past, like the Guthy-Renker portfolio, they were very wonderful and open in sharing that back and forth because that's what drives their business. But then you'll have others that are a little bit more closed on that policy. And they're starting to build, what we're starting to see too, is a lot of insights and analytics teams starting to grow and being built within all of our client direct relationships as well. So we're hoping that that data isn't then just going to be internalized, that it will be surfaced so that we're again working hand in hand with them and leveraging the data that makes sense to drive their results for them.
I mean, you mentioned Gunther Rinker. I mean, this is not new. TV has always done direct response and home shopping and all those good things. I guess the thing that's different now is you have more data and more precision in terms of tracking it end to end. So that's what's driving it, basically. So I wonder, are we ever going to lose the luster of television as an experience? You know, the upfront, the unlimited shrimps at the Lincoln Center, things like that.
Nothing can replace that.
But it seems like, you know, I talked about the Oscars or, you know, live sports events. Those seem to be the big tentpoles now. Do you think the culture will shift at any point?
I think as long as good content is still being produced, I think there will be a place for that. It's interesting to see how some of the traditional TV upfronts are also changing. For ABC, for example, they have digital is a must-have presence there. So I think they're just going to need to evolve as opposed to being the way that maybe they were in the past. And you know, the new fronts that are happening now for digital. So the new fronts came to the West Coast this past year. So that was exciting. So if these kinds of trends continue, where it's, again, still focusing around the content and that consumer experience, I think they still will thrive.
I think it's already changing. I mean, there's massive brands with huge marketing budgets that could care less about the upfronts, that are doing awesome things in DTC and other places. And so it is changing. I know it's easy for us to concentrate on the upfronts when they come around, and the big brands that drive this country are still participating, but it's already gone.
And I would say outside of the unlimited shrimp, you see, if you want to talk about societal events that you aggregate around, I know there was discussion if those are important or not in terms of reach and marketing. Look at what Netflix is doing. They're putting out their shows in contextual right times and things like that. Put aside the fact that you can't advertise there, they are capturing cultural zeitgeist, and you might watch it now or later, but the content that's really sparking consumer interest, something like a Stranger Things, people are aggregating around it. However they're watching Netflix, there's 8 ways to Sunday to get your stream, but that content, as you can see throughout the industry, is what's aggregating people. So in a true democratic fashion, the best content is going to win, and then we have to see if that's going to be ad-supported or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. It's not new. We had HBO back in the day. It's still around. But, everybody took bets on when HBO would accept advertising. It still does not. Netflix still doesn't. You have Hulu. You have a lot of subscription video on demand services. It looks to me like the tide is moving more towards consumer-supported media. We did an analysis with PQ Media recently, which estimated the average American now spends $285 a month on media subscriptions, and that's everything. But that's a lot of money. On the other side, it's contracting your reach through high-quality video content to the consumer. Is there an existential problem here?
There's still a lot of video content out there. Interestingly, there is a vast dispersion in CPMs in the marketplace, and that's starting to reflect, I don't want to say quality because it's a very subjective term, but perhaps when you get down to the viewability of it and all that sort of stuff, the more engaging video that's out there, but there's still, the good stuff is still constrained in terms of supply, but there is a long tail of other video content out there.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated with that word premium. We're going to drop a survey soon to see what people mean by that. But any more questions from the audience on where does TV/connected/OTT sit in the plan, and how does it build up?
Let us know who you are and where you're from. Oh, it's Brennan from DataZoo. Do you guys use ACR data in your planning?
So we have used ACR data in the past, yes, and I think that it is something that we would continue to use in the future. We're also, to the best of our ability, doing a lot of competitive conquesting, using that listening technology. If you are, for example, watching family-oriented programming and we can recognize that in your set-top box, we can then competitively conquest you with another service or product, whatever the case may be. So yes, I think some of those interesting technologies definitely have a place.
Since I signed up for YouTube TV, I think I'm using it right now. I think it's recording everything we're hearing.
Adrian, I wanted to pick up on something you had said earlier about that you have, for certain campaigns, you have channel experts. And I'm curious, if maybe all of you could address this, about this question of expertise within the agency and whether that expertise is now being spread across channels, or if you really are having sort of domain or channel expertise and how that's organized, how you're talking to each other about whether is there a YouTube champion, is there an OTT champion, is there a linear TV champion, how they're actually talking to each other and sort of talking about their media.
So within our organization, what's nice is because of the integrated planning approach to things, we have people that are streaming across all sides. But for the folks that do have a more traditional television background from the start, whether they like it or not, I'll say, is we are immersing them in as much education as possible about all things digital. Not just OTT, not just video, everything, social media, content and influencers, search, the whole gamut, because the more they understand about the funnel from top to bottom, the more effective we believe they're going to be when they're planning at the top. So we have a bit of an academic approach to that 60-40 split between upper and lower funnel. Again, it can vary depending on the campaign and the client, but for the most part, that's where we're looking. So we are bringing in different publishers and different vendors in the tech space and everything else to really educate. And when we do a lunch and learn, it's an open forum. Anybody and everybody across the agency is welcome to come. It doesn't have to be the planning discipline that you're in.
Yeah, for us, I think, I really like the word you use, champion, as opposed to expert. I think that's how we kind of try to set our teams up, that we have a champion of certain platforms, but everybody is immersed in everything and needs to at least be able to place media on all of them.
And our video investments team is really a center of excellence, knowing what capabilities are out there. I think from a more strategic perspective, it depends on the client and what they're more focused on. For a more CPG client, that team might be a little bit more versed in what's out there linearly. With a hotels client, they might be more focused in the addressable space, but that's more of an experiential rather than a focus. And that's, as we start to integrate teams, moving people from account to account, you get that cross-pollination of knowledge.
Hi, Kevin from ATN. What's the strategy that you implement? Consumers are simultaneously consuming media, so they may be watching traditional TV and they're on their iPad, they're on their phone. Do you ever implement like, hey, we know this spot's going to run at 9:05, and at the same time we're going to do a bias search on Google, so when they go to look for that product, that's the first on the top of the list?
So we always recommend when you are running television in more of a mass schedule or in a tentpole event, for example, making sure that budgets are being raised around those different channels as well. Search in particular is a huge driver. TV and search going hand in hand, typically with Facebook in the mix too, just to have that mix there. I think you do a disservice to your brand if you're not amping up in those areas, especially when you have pulses of media or spikes like that. And wherever possible, leveraging retargeting channels, whether you're retargeting somebody on an OTT device, on their phone, wherever they may be, always making sure that all of those things are in play so that we can apply sequential messaging as well when it makes sense to really drive that impression home a little further.
We use a lot of that simultaneous screening, if you will, for a lot of our scrappy underdog brands, where if you're making a push against a certain context or tentpole, it's not just your video mix, but also layering that with Facebook and things like that. On a similar side, for some of the ACR pieces, competitive conquesting, if you're an underdog brand again and you're being outspent 5-1 in the video space, we can use that to, be very targeted, to make sure at least we're at a equitable share of voice with a competitor that's outspending us to, at least try to be as efficient as possible that way.
Yeah, tentpole moments for us for sure. Campaign announcements, debates, conventions, things like that. That's where we're definitely matching those up.
Oh, we have one? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Josh.
Hi, guys. It's Josh Martin from Performix. I just had a question on cost. It's interesting, the panel is where does it sit, but does it work? And do you guys have concerns of the cost premiums associated with these new environments? I know in the world of direct response, if you didn't have a different rate card and a lower cost, television or cable television wouldn't work in the same capacity. So I just wanted your thoughts on that.
So from a performance standpoint, definitely I think there are some interesting strategies that you can leverage. So, there's the DRTV buying approach, of course, where you have those preemptive models. Those same preemptive models are in play at other large OTT organizations. They don't overtly advertise that necessarily. And then because again, it is that preemptive approach, and a lot of people do want to buy that guaranteed schedule. However, as you start to work more and more with these large organizations that have those things in play, you start to learn where those sellout periods are going to be, and then you make sure that they're on the plan during the periods where they're not going to be sold out, where you're not going to be preempted, and you're going to pay a quarter of the price. So that's how we tend to handle the pricing challenge.
Media companies salivate at the election season, so I think the premium rates that I look at are probably a little different than what others would ever find acceptable. And so ours is, it's relative, but we are looking at them across media companies, platforms, et cetera, in real time to try and see if we can find efficiencies. But at the end of the day, we got to spend everything by election day, and so we run out of options, and we definitely do make inefficient buys along the way.
The investment piece is actually a pretty interesting story from what we do, because our video center of excellence has a good sense of where the CPMs are falling for different channels, let's say, and then the strategy or planning team will collaborate with them to understand, generally speaking, what the effective CPM is, right? So if you have a TV buy where you can estimate 50% of your audience is there, well, that's double the CPM. Whereas if you have an online video plan, it's, let's call it 90% targeted, you can start to figure out what the best balance is, and then we'll actually take those estimated effective CPMs and optimize that way. So that a lot of times if something is, at first blush, a high CPM from a demo perspective, let's say that effective targeted CPM could be much more efficient based on the focus.
Well, it's a funny business where you still have direct response rate cards at stations. I didn't even realize that still existed, but then you have the other side of the world of programmatic optimization. I'm surprised that TV hasn't swung over to that yet, but
I think some are trying, some are trying to get into the programmatic television space. I think it's finally now getting a bit better, but I think unfortunately, previously, you were getting a lot of local remnant inventory that you wouldn't necessarily want to pay a premium for. So that's why I don't think it worked too well.
Well, I think the panel's almost over, but we should have gotten into brand safety, but.
Well, I want to ask a final question that stupidly opens up another big can of worms, but maybe we can do this in the roundtable, is we haven't addressed brand in-housing and how that impacts your organization, especially when it comes to the fact that it adds another layer of complication to all of this cross-channel planning, is what happens when the brand is deciding to bring some of this in-house. You've got traditional brands that are trying to bring in pieces of it. Then you've also got this new generation of direct-to-consumer brands that are bringing enormous digital online expertise, but little experience with TV. I'm curious if any of you have any experience with working with this phenomenon of in-housing and how that mixes up this whole structure.
We like to say at our agency, every day is a new day. Because every client that we work with across our portfolio, we are involved in a different way. So for one client in particular, we would be their brand media AOR. For another client, we're handling everything across the funnel from the branded media right down to paid search. So every engagement that we have with our clients is very different. So we're dealing with those unique challenges every single day. So I think it's a good education for us as well as our clients. We're learning what's working and what's not working. And really, this year, we're focusing a lot more around the collaboration, whether it's data sharing, performance sharing, those kinds of things. That's really an important and a critical step for us as we're seeing more and more of this. And like I said earlier, the data insights and analytics teams that are being built internally at these organizations and getting that sharing and collaboration.
We still, at least my brands, we work a lot with the media directors in-house, so there's not a full agency team there. I would say the principle would probably be similar as long as you're aligning on what the strategic goals are for the clients and how you're going to get there or where you're strategically placing your bets, academically how you're approaching the video plan. As long as those are set and then you have rules of the road, you can certainly play nice with an in-house agency.
I think it's like search or pure play digital, which is the long tail brands will embrace that in-house first, and when they get big enough, they'll hire Havas. So.
But as Adrian's point is interesting. It almost sounds as if the brand's in-housing actually helps you organize a little bit, because in some sense they're taking the lead, and you better understand what structure you need to put in place to deal with each of the brands.
For sure, especially when they have a strong performance marketing team internally that might handle all of their programmatic and their search and those more performance-driven campaigns. They need to understand how our upper funnel media is driving those activities, and we need to understand how it's performing on their end so that we can inform how we're buying from up here as well. So it is a synergistic relationship, and it is getting stronger, I think, as opposed to this backing off.
And we're going to take this up at the round table on this same topic. Joe, as always, thank you very much. Panel, great start. Thank you. You have some, John. You have some notes on activities.
Yep, just a couple quick announcements here. So I'm Julie McCoy. If you haven't figured that out yet, I'm the. Okay, we have a laugher, a Julie McCoy fan, someone who knows what that means. We're kind of an older group here. Raise your hand if you know the Julie McCoy reference. Okay, yeah. I'm your purser. Is that right? The purser. And you're Captain Steubing.
Captain Stu. That makes me Captain Steubing.
I think all those people in that show are dead now. I think all of them are dead now. Okay. So very quickly, we're going to move to a coffee break now. But outside, we still have our sign-up sheets for the afternoon activities.